All righty. So we are moving right along through Jacob's story here, and we're up to Genesis 34 is where we'll be tonight. You know, and sometimes I think Claude took this week off on purpose, you know? You read that and you go, oh man, that's what I got to teach tonight. So, whew. But it's a heavy chapter, but you know, I think one thing we can realize is that God's word is truly inspired, right? Because who else would write this about your patriarchs of your religion, to write all this sorry stuff, horrible things, and of the people that were there at the start of our. Nobody would do that except for God, right? So we can be assured that these words are inspired, they are from God, and that God is always in control and right. So, my style is different than Claude's. I really, truly appreciate Claude, and I like what he's doing, but my brain doesn't work quite that way. So, what I like to do is let's read through it, and then we'll start back at the beginning, and we'll go through and break it down. That way we sort of have a good idea where we're going. So I'm going to start just with reading Genesis 34. And my Bible's got the heading Dinah and the Shechemites. It says, now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, had born to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her, he took her and raped her. His heart was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. And Shechem said to his father Hamor, get me this girl as my wife. When Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the field with his livestock, so he did nothing about it until they came home. Then Shechem's father Hamor went out to talk with Jacob. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons had come in from the fields, and as soon as they heard what had happened, they were shocked and furious, because Shechem had done an outrageous thing in Israel by sleeping with Jacob's daughter, the thing that should not be done. But Hamor said to them, my son Shechem has his heart set on your daughter. Please give her to him as his wife. Intermarry with us. Give us your daughters and take our daughters for yourselves. You can settle among us in the land is open to you. Live in it, trade in it, and acquire property in it. Then Shechem said to Dinah's father and brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and I will give you whatever you ask. Make the price for the bride and the gift I am to bring as great as you like, and I'll pay whatever you ask me. Only give me the young woman as my wife. Because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke to Shechem and his father Hamor. They said to them, we can't do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who is not circumcised. That would be a good disgrace to us. We enter into an agreement with you on one condition, only that you become like us by circumcising all your males. Then we will give you our daughters and take your daughters for ourselves. We'll settle among you and become one people with you. But if you will not agree to be circumcised, we'll take our sister and go. Their proposal seemed good to Hamor and his son Shechem, the young man who was the most honored of all his father's family, lost no time in doing what they had said, because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of their city to speak with the men of their city. These men are friendly towards us, they said. Let them live in our land and trade in it. The land has plenty of room for them. We can marry their daughters and they can marry ours. But the men will agree to live with us as one people only on the condition that our males be circumcised, as they themselves are. Won't their livestock, their property, and all their other animals become ours? So let's agree to their terms, and they will settle among us. All the men who went out of the city gate agreed with Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male in the city was circumcised. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, 2 of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys and everything else of theirs in the city and out in the fields. They carried off all their wealth and all their women and children, taking as plunder everything in the houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the Canaanites and Perizzites and the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." But they replied, "Should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?" And so far, the reading of God's word. So we'll go back to the start here. And actually, we can even go up a little bit into chapter 33 and look at what Jacob was doing. If we look at the last part of chapter 33, we see Jacob was still, if we remember, his big problem was lying, right? He had lied to Esau here at the end, said, you go on ahead of us, and we'll be behind you. We can't drive these flocks too quickly. And instead of following, as God had sort of wanted him to do, and go back to Bethel, he decided he's going to take a sharp right and go north instead of south. And he ends up in Shechem, or just outside of Shechem, I shouldn't say. He didn't go into the city, but, it bears a lot of similarities to remember the whole story of Abraham and Lot. This was like a family thing going on here, really. So right from the start, we know that Jacob's not in God's will here. He's gone, he's done his own thing here, whether it's out of fear, whether it's out of other things. He's gone to a place other than where God wanted him. And you can see it sets them up for some very bad things to happen. And so on to 34. And it says, "Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, had borne Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land." We think, most of the scholars think she's probably 15 years old, about approximately that age. At this point, she's maybe 7, 8 when they first met Esau. So they've been there some time. They've been living here just outside of Shechem for a while. One of the great problems in how do I want to phrase this? One of the biggest issues we face in life, in our faith walk, is, does the world influence us, or do we influence the world? I think what we saw here with Jacob settling near Shechem, the world was starting to influence Jacob and his family. And you see Dinah, this was not a Christian nation where they're at. This was not a Christian area. Shechem was, they were heathens, okay? Most people think she went down to the city at this time because they're probably having a festival or something going on there. They're hard to say. God doesn't tell us that specifically. This is what historians, this stuff can surmise, but she goes down there. She's by herself. Think about that. Not a good idea, and especially in the cultures of that time. We talked about, last time we talked about, I would have told my daughter to run from Jacob if some stranger comes up and kisses you, and, but we have to understand the cultures of the day. The cultures of the day here were, if you were a foreign woman by yourself in a city like this, it was not a safe place for you to be at all. This was not a good thing. Now, they had lived outside the city for 7 years, 8 years at this point, so maybe there was some familiarity there with some of the people or something. Maybe they'd done some trading, who knows? But it was a poor decision. And that falls back on her parents too, right? On Jacob and on Leah. Why did you let her go? There's a lesson for us there. We need to teach our children, right? We need to watch over them. They're our responsibility. While they're in our home, God asked us to look out for them. They failed here. So, on to verse 2, it says, when Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of that area, so he's like the prince, saw her, he took her and raped her. So, I've read a lot of different commentators' versions of this. Some of them tried to minimize that, but there's no minimizing. I mean, it's pretty clear. It was against her will. It was not the right thing to do. It was evil. Okay. It says, his heart was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So, you see sort of an opposite thing of, what was it, Tamar? In the early, where, when the guy had taken advantage of her, stepbrother had taken advantage of her, and then he hated her. But here, this guy loves her, says, oh, I want this girl to be my wife. So he goes to his dad, who's the ruler. He says, Shechem, get me this girl as my wife. And so we go on to verse 5. It says, when Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the fields with his livestock. So he did nothing about it till they came home. Couple things there. Pretty entitled young man, right? Yeah. Hey, Dad, get me this. It sounds like he's sort of used to getting what he wants. But also, as we continue to read too, there doesn't seem to be any remorse on his part. There's no, this was the wrong thing to do. It's just sort of like, I want her yet, this is what I want. So get it for me. There's no apologies of I shouldn't have done that or anything like that. So, lesson learned. We can't expect people who aren't believers, who don't understand Christ and the way God lays out for our lives. We can't expect folks who don't have that belief system to act like they are, like Christians. That's a lesson for today as well. We can't expect people out there in our country where so many have no knowledge anymore of the Bible. I mean, even in our churches sometimes, we can't expect always people to maintain a standard that Christ calls us to. It's just not going to happen. We're going to follow our own way, right? Do you have any input on that, John?
When I was reading this, I thought of a contemporary thing, what happened in Iraq and Saddam Hussein's sons. It was a regular thing. They would just go and take even married women or whatever.
Yeah.
If they saw them, they wanted them, they took them. And sometimes they'd murder them when they were done with them.
Yeah.
They had that liberty. I think the point for me, maybe for us, is we can't assume that other cultures who don't have Christ, don't have Christianity, have any standards similar to ours.
Right.
We can't expect them, or even ask them, to act in a moral manner when they're immoral.
Yes. You're exactly right, John. Yeah. Strong's is one I did not look at, but yeah, they all. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I saw it a little differently. I saw it more of an abuser. An abuser will do something that's awful.
Oh yeah.
And then sweet talk right afterwards.
Yeah.
It's like this toggle switch. It's either on
Mhm.
or off. And that's just, it's dysfunctional relationship is what it is. And it's predicated on crime. That was a criminal act. You did.
Oh yeah. Yep. And Yeah, the culture, like we had said, yeah, it was much different, but doesn't make it right. It's still just as evil can be. So, and I think you're right, Chuck. Yeah, there is sort of that, you know, abuser mentality there. But we'll read on here. Yeah, thank you for that, because I can lose my way real quick. Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled. His sons were in the fields with his livestock, so he did nothing about it till they came home. Some of the commentators said, you know, that the sons actually had more responsibility in dealing with this than the father, in a way, because the father is like, you know, how did they word it? The father, if it happened to his wife or whatever, it would be, you know, he could divorce her or whatever. But if it happens to your sister, she's still always your sister. And the retribution that you would want to take would always be there yet. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that's what they had said. I think Jacob was just cowardly here. You know, he wasn't living up to it. But you think back. This was his daughter by Leah. Leah was not his favored wife. He, you know, the whole favorites, he loved Rachel. He loved her and her kids. They, you know, you get further into the story, you know how he played favorites with the children. But, you know, how much of a relationship he had with Dinah, we're not told. But one can assume that it probably wasn't as close. And given, you know, you got 11 kids at this point, I don't think he paid as much attention there as he should have. But go down to verse 6. It says, "Then Shechem's father Hamor went out to talk with Jacob. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons had come in from the fields. As soon as they heard what had happened, they were shocked and furious, because Shechem had done an outrageous thing in Israel. And that's the first time, actually, that the word Israel is used here in reference to Jacob's family. Yeah, you know, God had given him the name Israel during that fight, right? And here's the first time they really talk about that. Well, you look at the wording in the original language, it's sort of against Israel, not in Israel, but done this outrageous thing against Israel, against the family. That's the idea there. In sleeping with Jacob's daughter, a thing that should not be done. So they see what's happened. They're angry, and righteously so, right? You know, who wouldn't be? If this happened to your sister, you would be furious as well. But we have the responsibility still to handle things in a proper manner. So we read on. Hamor said to them, "My son Shechem has his heart set on your daughter. Please give her to him as his wife. Intermarry with us, and give us your daughters, and take our daughters for yourselves. You can settle among us. The land is open to you. Live in it, trade in it, and acquire property in it." So he throws out the carrot, right? He throws out the temptation here of, hey, look, this could work out for you. You know, just let my son have your daughter as his wife, and look at all the things you could get. We've got lots more land here. We've got daughters as well, and you know, this could all work out. This could be good for both of us. I think he's seeing the riches that Jacob had too, and there's a lot of thought by commentators that this wasn't that great of a place, that big of a place, that this was a way for him to increase his wealth as well. And we get a little hint of that when he talks to the men of the city further down. But this is something too that God would be totally against, right? His whole idea was don't assimilate with the other cultures, because what's going to happen? You're going to get watered down. It's not going to be you anymore and me. That agreement we had, it's you know, the covenant of making you a great people. Not if this happens. But Hamor throws that out there. And then Shechem, the rapist here, says to Dinah's father and the brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and I will give you whatever you ask. Make the price of the bride and the gift I am to bring, as great as you like, and I'll pay whatever you ask me. Only give me this young woman as my wife." Now, because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke to Shechem and his father Hamor. I guess the lesson there is the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, right? You know, they saw their father compromise so many times. This was something that came naturally to them as well. And as all of us, you know, we're all sinners, right? They were angry. They thought they had the right. They justified it in their mind. If we can lie to them if we're doing it for the right reason, right? But their father had said, you know, to Esau, "Hey, yeah, I'll be right behind you," and then turns and goes the other way. They saw this growing up. They were used to this. So, go on. All right. They said to them, okay, this is Levi and Simeon talking to Hamor and Shechem. "We can't do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who's not circumcised." So they're sort of using their religion or their relation as a guise, yes, as a disguise for their deceit here. That would be a disgrace to us. "We will enter into an agreement with you on one condition only, that you become like us by circumcision, all your males. Then we will give you our daughters and take your daughters for ourselves. We'll settle among you and become one people with you. But if you will not agree to be circumcised, we'll take our sister and go." So they put the pressure on with this agreement with Hamor and Shechem. They're saying, "Look, we're not going to do this unless you do this for us." They also are told here, "We'll take our sister." Their daughter was still over at Shechem's house. You know, it wasn't like she was back at the ranch, and she was still there. So just gives you an idea how different that culture was, right? We would have had the police there, right? Or, and rolling up and pull her out of there, and, we'd be talking in the police station about this, but it wasn't that way, obviously. So, they're met with, an agreement. So it says, verse 18, "Their proposal seemed good to Hamor and his son Shechem, the young man who was most honored of all his father's family, lost no time in doing what they said, or lost no time in getting circumcised, because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter." So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of their city to speak to the men of the city. And they're going to try to sell it to all their residents. And you think, these guys must have really liked Hamor and Shechem as their leaders to do this, right? Because that's not a fun procedure as an adult. Say that gracefully, but that's not something you would take lightly to do. And so these men are friendly towards us, they said. "Let them live in our land, trade in it, and the land has plenty of room for them. And we can marry their daughters, and they can marry ours, but the men will only agree to live with us as one people on the condition that all our males be circumcised as they themselves are. Won't their livestock, their property, and all their other animals become ours?" So they're selling it on both ends, right? They're selling it to Jacob and his family, and now they're going back and selling it to their own people. They're like the used car salesman of the desert here.
I think it's just interesting that Jacob's sons used their bait as bait.
Yes.
They turned their own words on them.
Yeah.
And that was part of the deceit.
Yeah.
You might say wise deceit.
Yes.
That's good.
Yes. Low mileage. Yeah, low mileage, yes. So, well, they're like promising these guys, look, you're going to get all these guys' stuff too. So let us agree to their terms and they will settle among us. And so all the men who went out to the city gate agreed with Haman and his son Shechem, and every male in the city was circumcised. So 3 days later, while all were still in pain, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers. So, it makes sense. They're the ones closest to her, the ones most incensed by what had happened, go. And they took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. So they go out, and you think of what they did, how brutal. I mean, we think God later, when the Israelites further down the road entered into the promised land, they were ordered to kill everybody, right, in certain cities and stuff. But this was them taking this on their own, making their own decision about the morality of whether this was right or wrong. And they go and just wipe the place out, right, and take everything. So the sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city. So the rest of the family shows up after this and says, hey, look at all this stuff. So they seized all the flocks and herds and donkeys and everything of theirs in the city, out in the fields, and they carried off all their wealth, their women and children, taking as plunder everything in the houses. So it was an enrichment scheme, really, for them, wasn't it? They took everything. They were able to just come away with increasing their holdings, basically. And then we finally get to Jacob again, who did nothing at first, right? And now we hear from Jacob again. It says, Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the Canaanites and Perizzites and the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed. So, what do we learn from Jacob here? I mean, this guy's lived in fear so much of his life, right? He's used lying to get out of it sometimes. But he was fearful when he went to meet Esau, thinking, maybe this guy's going to take me out this time finally. Here he is. He's not angry, about what they did so much, but what the consequences might be for him afterwards because of this. And it doesn't turn out to be true, actually. If we look at history, it's the Canaanites and stuff were afraid of them after this, thinking, good grief, these people are ruthless. They'll kill you if you do anything. So he did make them, he was right, they were obnoxious to the people of the land, but they backed off. They didn't come near him. And they replied to their father, should he have treated our daughter like a prostitute? Or our sister. Thank you. Yeah, you got it right. And they're right. He shouldn't have done it. And it was sinful. It was evil. But what they did through their deception, their lying, their murder of innocent people, I mean, the other folks, Shechem was the only one who really could have, you could have justified this action against him. But the rest, they just took out the whole crew, right? And so we look at it and we go, all right, what lesson can we take from this? I think one thing we see, despite the evil that they did, they did a horrible thing. God still was able to use their wicked actions to protect his people. From if the things had gone through, if they hadn't done this, the possibility of them assimilating into that culture and losing their identity as God's chosen people could have been real. I mean, God would have found a way around it. You know, he isn't bound by our actions, right? His plan's gonna succeed no matter what, but it may have succeeded in a very different way than how it did. Also, lying is bad, right? On both ends. We learn that from Jacob's life. Right from the start, through how it just comes through into your family, into your children. What kids see in our lives is what they're going to repeat. I mean, when I think about that, that gives me hesitation. It's like, oh, gee, I hope my kids don't do everything I did. You know? I mean, we all have our challenges, right? We all have our things, but God gives us these lessons. Right, Jane? Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. I think as humans, as sinners, it is in our blood, isn't it? It's you don't have to teach kids how to lie always. They do learn it really well if you lie too. But you know you take the average 3-year-old. Marge could probably tell you this from working with them. You tell them, who dumped all this stuff out on the floor? Well, I don't know. It's like, you know, they're very good about it. So you know we all have that issue, and but the thing I take away too is that God knew all this was going to happen before it did, right? He still chose these people as his own. He still chose to make them his chosen people, despite their flaws, their sinfulness, their screw-ups. He knew all this was going to happen, and he still chose them. And I find hope for us in that. God knows us intimately. He knows our faults, our things we've messed up on in life, and he still chooses to love us and to offer us a hope and a salvation. And wow, what other God would give us this example? You don't find this in any other religion in this world, of a God who chooses messed up people. It's always God's going to choose the perfect person. He's not going to, think about that. A God who can use broken things to accomplish his purposes. And I think that's really one of the big lessons we can take from Jacob's life and his family.
Several things run through my mind with this, but the whole chapter is a chapter of failure.
Yes.
There is no morality on either side. There are no principles on either side. And in a sense, they do to each other.
Yes.
Outside of God, they do to each other. And so it's not a God factor what went on in this chapter.
Mm-hmm.
What he did, as you said. I mean, God said, I'm going to make you a great nation, said to Abraham, and it extended through.
Mm-hmm.
In spite of us, he will not, his plan will not be defeated.
Yes.
I think that's good, but you can't find God in this chapter.
No.
You can't find him in Jacob's thoughts, in his son's thoughts. You see some slight morality in the sense that what Shechem did was wrong,
Yeah.
and they wanted to avenge him and so forth, but you just can't see God on either side of this. It's all evil, it's all self-will and self-promoting. And yet, at the end of the chapter, God's
Yes.
plan still moves forward. And I think that's
Yeah.
really the wonder of it. And I think it's just
Right.
another way of saying what you said.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I found interesting,
Yes,
I'm
Peter.
not sure where it fits, that Simeon and Levi were the two.
Yeah.
Thinking about Levi's, where that family went to be the priest,
Mm-hmm.
and generally that, dispatches the law as well as what the punishment be. And it seems like Levi, right from the get-go, not being right, was administering
Yes. Yeah, it is.
Something interesting too is that 2 chapters earlier, remember who Jacob came across? His brother Esau, and who? 400 fighting men. 400 men, it didn't say fighting, I added that.
Yeah. Artistic license?
And so I don't know if the lesson there is that sometimes God puts resources at our fingertips and we totally miss them.
Yeah.
He was worried at the end about his reputation. If my
Yeah.
reputation being obnoxious gets out there, these other countries can band together and then they'll be greater than us and they'll take us out. He doesn't reference my family includes Esau
Yeah.
now because we've reconciled and we have 400 assets, 400
Right.
men. But he totally overlooks that. And again, it's not here, so it's just kind of, to me though, it's like glaring, sticking out. It's like, wow. Is the
Yeah.
principle there that God has resources available to us that we forget they're there, we rely on ourselves, we see only the circumstance at the moment, we don't see the
Yeah.
big picture.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, if we would go further, and I don't know how far Claude goes in this too, but when Jacob comes to the end of his life, we look at what happens with Simeon and Levi, and basically their tribes get broken up. You know, Simeon's is dissolved basically, Levi's gets dispersed among the rest of the tribes. Sort of a blessing in a way to put his influence in the other tribes in some regard, but Jacob does not bless them at the end. They don't. They are in a different league than the other brothers at the end. So consequences are there. Oh, did you have something?
Yeah, I think the most puzzling part of all these verses is 19.
Okay.
So the young man did not delay to do the thing because he delighted in Jacob's daughter.
Yeah.
He was more honorable
Mhm.
than all the household of his father. How could the rapist be more honorable? Am I reading that right? Like,
I guess honorable's not probably the.
Comparative,
Yeah, the correct. He. What is it?
Most honored in the NIV, which means,
Yeah.
I think, he's favored. He was sort of a special. Well, I
Yeah.
have 2 sons, but one is real.
Yeah.
Special.
So,
Well,
Yeah.
that's why he got his way out.
he.
so he didn't
Yeah.
have like honor. He was just born.
Well,
The area's name.
maybe honorable in that he actually did what he said he was going to do.
He was
Eh,
just probably a less bad rascal,
Yeah. So.
because he was a rascal.
Yeah, but yeah, it's, certainly he's not honorable in a moral sense as far as what he did with her, but,
If he was, like, that everybody else was even worse than him, that maybe that's why the brothers went after everyone, because they're like, he's not as bad at all, so we're not going to recruit,
yeah.
because,
Yeah, I mean, oh,
He's honorable. He's honored in his family. He's the oldest son.
yeah,
That's why the father backed him.
yeah. I guess I'd want to look into it more. I know I read a few of the commentaries. I cannot remember everything about that statement. Why they did. There was one that explained it, and I can't remember which one, so I don't want to misquote it. But we'll look into that more, and we'll
It's also interesting though that the area called Shechem, in the title of it is Dinah and the Shechemites.
mm-hmm,
It's not, they don't carry the fathers, it's not Amorites,
right.
it's Shechemites. So it's like it's like the area
Yeah.
carries his name. I don't know why
Yeah.
it is, maybe it's a cultural thing or something.
Yeah, I want to think that Hamor was over the entire area, and Shechem was, whether he named his son after that city or what. Yeah, but that's where they were sort of based, in that town. So,
I think it is interesting, I said before, it's a comparative. He was more honorable than the house of his father. He was honorable, he was just the best of the lot.
there you go.
I think that's exactly what it's saying.
Yeah,
Out of all these rascals, he was the least rascal.
yeah.
I'm curious
So-
at how
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Basically what, Noah figured to get off the boat. So from that, they were able to sort of, and maybe that God was, because they were able to train Abel that we are
Hmm.
people. But apart from that, all these lying and cheating and
Mhm.
sexual immorality, all those things are, maybe it's hard, but still,
Yeah.
it's interesting.
That's good.
That he's considered honorable. Wasn't the oldest brother, wasn't he called honorable? He realized that he slept with someone, prostitute. When he realized who it was, he realized he was not honorable.
For Judah, yeah, when he, I think it was, he actually used it, "You are more honorable than I think is what he said to her after finding out who she was, that, he was his son's daughter, or son's wife, that, yeah. So, anyway, lots of lessons, lots of thought to take away from this one, right? So we'll tell Claude that he's got lots of questions when he comes back. No, I'm sorry, Claude, not really. So, but all right. Well, let's close in prayer. God, you are so good to us. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the lessons you teach us, the examples you give us. Lord, that you would put this in your word. Oh, God, help us to ponder it and learn from it. God, help us to live lives that bring you honor and glory, Lord. Help us to be a shining light to those around us. That, God, there is a way better than what we would find ourselves, God, to live our lives. A way, Lord, that brings life, not death. God, give us wisdom in how we live our lives, how we interact with others, Lord. And throughout this week, Lord, I pray you'll meet each person here, Lord, at whatever point of need they need you, God. I know we all come carrying different burdens and things in our lives, Lord, but I pray, God, that you will be near to us this week, that we will seek you and find you. And God, I ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, guys. I believe so. Yes, ma'am.